interesting, but we felt that there was a bit of a bias, and there was a strong dominance of Christian organizations and Western organizations. This didn't really come as a surprise to us. We know this from our work. We know that debates about development and faith are often dominated by either Christian or Western organizations. So we then decided that we wanted to dig a bit deeper and reach out more broadly, and that's really what we did. We contacted around 90 gatekeepers and conducted over 30 semi-structured interviews with stakeholders from research and practice, including local faith actors as well. And the purpose of these interviews was either to provide context or to develop a case study or a story of change, how we then started calling them. I spoke to an awful lot of people from very diverse backgrounds. It was fascinating research, fascinating interviews. You can see here on the slide, Buddhist organizations, Christian ones, Hindu ones, Islamic ones, Jewish and secular organizations in pretty much every region of the world. I think the only part of the world that's missing here is Australia. So it was really, really interesting to hear from all these people, to speak with all these people, and to sit here at home in my living room in the UK, and yeah, speak with people in the Philippines and in Hawaii and in New York and what have you. It was fascinating stuff. And then in terms of the findings, I said that one of the main aims of this research was to develop a compendium of good practices. And we presented these in these stories of change, which are around 2 or 3 pages long, focus on a specific organization and their challenges and their lessons learned with regards to meal and faith. And I've put the list of organizations on the slide here for you. You can see that it's quite a broad range, both in terms of the organization's backgrounds. We have Islamic faith-based organizations, different Christian ones. We have Buddhist ones. We have an interfaith organization. And you can see also in terms of geographical scope that it's quite broad. So there's the Middle East, there's other parts of Asia, Africa, Latin America, Africa, the Caribbean, and then a number of organizations that operate regionally or even worldwide. I'm not going to go through all of them in detail. I think this would take an awful lot of time. But I wanted to put them all on one slide for you so that you can see, so that you can get an impression of how broad this compendium is, and how many different stories and how many different experiences we share. The compendium is available online, so if you go to the JLI website, you can literally just, let me see if I can put it in the chat. There you go. I'll post the direct links. I've put the website of the Learning Hub in the chat now. I put the direct links to the compendium. Compendium is almost 100 pages long, so it's a lot of information. You can really dig into this if you have an interest in development and faith. I will put the direct links to both the compendium and to the research summary brief, which we also produced, because we are aware that not everyone has the time to go through a almost 100-page long document. So we produced a 5-page research summary. You can find it on the website. I put it in the chat later, but I just carry on with the presentation for now because I can multitask a little bit, but not that much. Okay, so back to the presentation. Where were we? These stories of change. Yeah, so fascinating stuff. And if this is an area that you're interested in, then I would really encourage you to look at the compendium or the research summary brief. We also have direct links to individual case studies. So if you say, oh, I don't know, I work in Indonesia and I'm really interested in learning more about how Aman, the Asian Muslim Action Network, approach meal and faith in their work, or I'm an expert on, I don't know, Tanzania, and I want to know what Christian FBO in Tanzania do, then yeah, just go on the website and have a browse. Now, stories of change is one of the outcomes of this research, but we also speak in the compendium more generally about challenges and opportunities in the context of meal and faith in the sector. And I just wanted to share a few of these with you now. So in terms of challenges, it was really interesting to understand what some of the barriers were or are for organization to engage with meal. It was really, really interesting stuff. I told you that in the beginning, we realized it was we didn't realize, we really knew this before, but the data also supported the fact that the majority of organizations in this area, they are Christian or Western. And then we decided, as I mentioned earlier, to dig a bit deep and to reach out to those who didn't do meal and faith, who didn't have very sophisticated approaches in this area, to find out why not. And there were really 3 key reasons for why organizations did not engage as much or even not at all. One of these was limited resources and different priorities. So faced with the fact that funding is limited and there's only so much that even the most dedicated staff can get done, a lot of organizations just decided to focus on programming rather than meal. I think for those of us who work in the sector, that's very familiar and doesn't come as a big surprise. Another point which was quite interesting was that those organizations that mainly relied on community funding, on donations from the community, on individual donations, rather than institutional funding, they were also less likely to have any meal at all or more sophisticated approaches. And the reason for that is really that in the case of community funding, the relationship between the donor and the organization, the implementing organization, is really based on trust and on an existing relationship rather than more formalized meal approaches, as it would be the case in the case of working with institutional donors. So that was quite interesting. A third reason was faith-based and cultural reasons. And that was, for example, a different approach to data and accountability, right? So, for example, a feeling that that there's more value in stories and in experience than there is in hard numbers and in quantitative approaches, or going back to one of the interviews that I conducted with a member of a Hindu development organization, who said, who shared like his experience of working with some smaller Hindu organizations in India, and he said that some of these organizations have a spiritual leader, and the community just believes in the divine guidance of the spiritual leader, and then if that's the approach you're taking to your work, then there's obviously not much value in having formalized Western meal approaches, because you believe that the leader knows what he's doing and there's no reason to question him, right? So this was also quite interesting. And I say a bit more about about this question of whether we can go beyond Western meal in a bit. But let me mention 2 other points before that. And one is about opportunities. So these are the challenges. These are some of the reasons why organizations are less likely or hesitant to invest in meal and incorporate meal into their work. In terms of opportunities, it was really interesting to see that a lot of the organizations were motivated by a mix of internal and external drivers. Right? So external drivers quite often was a donor insisting on meal being integrated into the work. And then at sometimes it was also internal motivations. So in some cases it was also the organization saying, no, we value meal and we value having data on our operations, and this is something that we want to do to be able to improve our work, to celebrate success, and to have this data readily available. In some cases, it started with an external driver, with a donor insisting on data being collected, but then the organization really saw the value in meal and continued collecting this data, and so it was not required anymore. So that's the starting point, that's the entry point for a lot of organizations. And then what was really interesting to see was how these organizations and their meal approaches, how they evolved around some really quite big questions and big themes of participation, of partnerships, of ownership, and terminology. So a lot of the organizations, for a lot of them, it was important to be participatory in their approach. For a lot of them, as faith actors, partnerships and community were really important for them as well. We were then, because we were looking at partnerships between local organizations on the one hand and the national ones on the other, there was often also a tension between attention around ownership, right? So one question that kept on coming up was, how can we make sure that the work we are doing is useful for local faith actors, and how can we make sure that they are involved, that they participate, and that it's a sense of ownership, and it's not just another international and often Western organization imposing their approach on local actors. Terminology was also really important, because for a lot of the local faith actors that we spoke with, language was important, and it was as important for them how we spoke about our work as it was what exactly we were doing. So this was again, the community aspect played a really big role here. Securitization is the next keyword here, and this was something that was quite interesting that came up during the research process. I didn't put it under either challenges or opportunities because I felt it kind of covered both, which was quite interesting. So on the one hand, quite a few of the Western but non-Christian organizations that I spoke with, and this was the same for Islamic faith-based organizations, Buddhist faith-based organizations, and Hindu faith-based organizations, they really felt the pressure of the securitization, which, as we know, is increasing in large parts of the West. And these organizations could really feel the pressure, and they could really feel the suspicion, and they could really feel that they were being treated differently to Christian organizations. So it was a challenge for them, but it was also an opportunity. One of the Buddhist organizations I spoke with told me that they actually had to do more due diligence, and they had to incorporate even very basic meal procedures to their work because they knew that as a Western Buddhist organization working in Asia, that they would be held accountable to higher levels, and that they couldn't afford not to have the data available because of this atmosphere of suspicion against them. So that was quite an interesting point, and that really highlights that when we speak about local faith actors, or just faith actors in general, we really need to look at context, and we really need to look at the variety and the diversity of different faith actors. Okay, now I'll briefly say a few words about this question of can we, could we, should we go beyond Western meal? This has already come up a little bit when I spoke about faith-based and cultural reasons that pose barriers for local faith actors to engage more in meal. Really interesting stuff, and actually something that came a bit as a surprise to us, in the sense that it really changed our thinking about this project, and it actually changed the direction that we were taking with this project. So I told you that we started this project thinking about putting together a compendium that highlights good practices and lessons learned in meal, right? This was the original idea, and then we realized that most of the submissions were from Western and Christian organizations. I started digging a bit deeper and speaking with representatives of other organizations, and then it turned out that a lot of them did not really incorporate meal because they relied on community funding, because they had limited resources and different priorities, right? So points number 1 and number 2 under challenges here on the slide. But then it was so interesting to find out that some of them did not do it and were not interested in it for other reasons. And I still remember the conversation I had with a colleague of mine who is Buddhist, who is affiliated with a Buddhist organization in the sector. And I told her, look, I'm really interested in how Buddhist organizations approach meal. And can you tell me more about that? Like, what does your organization, what do they do? And she looked at me and she said, Jennifer, like, what are you talking about? Meal? Like, what is meal? She said, we don't do meal and we're not interested in meal. And I could have just stopped the conversation there, right? And we could have just said, well, that's it. They just don't do meal. So we just put together our compendium. We add our Christian organizations, maybe like the odd other organization from like other faith backgrounds, but that's just it. The other ones, they just don't do it. But we continued the conversation, and it turned out that they actually do things that they don't call meal, that a lot of meal practitioners would maybe not call meal either. But if you look closely at what they are doing and what the purpose of what they're doing is, and I think we could argue that it is actually a form of meal. A form of meal that is rooted in the Buddhist tradition, that refers to and relies on Buddhist concepts, but that nevertheless has the purpose of holding members to account, share learning, add an element of accountability to the work, and then that's meal, isn't it? So that was really interesting. In the conversations that I had with members of this organization, it then turned out that they have regular meetings, regular community meetings once a month on a local level, where people do religious chants.
Sorry for interrupting. I see you have still 2 slides left. You need to wrap up.
Yeah, I'm wrapping up. Yeah. So so these meetings consist of religious chants. They consist of reading the scriptures, but then there is also an element of sharing experiences, where people share individual journeys that they have been on, how they have encountered problems, difficulties, and how they have overcome them. Which they don't call meal, maybe we wouldn't either. But yeah, the question is it not also a form of meal? The question is, do all organizations in the sector need to adopt Western approaches, or can we actually be a bit more open, and also can there be space for other approaches? So that's really a question I would like to put out there. Now, in terms of the other slides, there's really just one more, and that's the question of what comes next. So I would just very briefly say that we are continuing the shared learning at the Meal Hub. The Meal Hub is open to join for anyone with an interest in meal and faith. It's free to join, so you literally just go to the website, enter your details, and then you receive emails from us. We meet every 2 months, more than welcome to join. And we are also working on 2 follow-up projects at the moment. One in collaboration with the Alliance for Peace Building. It's a research project on donors' perspectives on meal and faith. So this compendium focused on the experiences of implementing organizations. We now want to know what donors think about this. So this is what we're working on at the moment. And we have plans to set up a regional meal hub with a focus on the Middle East. And this is part of the JLI's ongoing work and commitment to try and make our approach more fair, more equitable, and more regionalized. So that's literally it. The last slide is just an invitation to ask questions and make comments. So yeah, I just leave it at that. And thank you so much for listening. Sorry if I went slightly over time. I was so excited to have so much time.
Thank you, Jennifer. Based on that last slide of comments and questions, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. We can give a hand of applause there in the reaction button. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for sharing us your very interesting project you're busy with and research you're busy with. I'm going to give an opportunity to our participants to post some comments or questions. You can raise your hands, or you can just put it in the chat box, and then I will facilitate it, and we will give Jennifer an opportunity to respond. Thank you very much, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Jack.
Any questions or comments?
Don't be shy. I don't bite.
Okay, Alma, I see you waving. So do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you very much for, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the interesting presentation. I wanted to ask you regarding the organizations, and you mentioned they said they didn't do any meal, and how do you, or they didn't want to do any meal, how do you approach these organizations to tell why do they should that? What are the arguments for them, or what do you talk to them to tell them, well, this is something that's worthy, or why do they should do this? What are the arguments for it if the organization said we're not really interested, or we don't actually need it?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Alma. So to me, this very much depended on who I was speaking with, both with regards to the reasons of that organization not to engage, but then also with regards to who I was with regards to that organization. So it's like in terms of researcher positionality. I mean, not just researcher, because I'm also a practitioner, so researcher, practitioner positionality. So there's really these 2 things. So to give an example for the first point, context, and the organization and their reasons not to engage. The Buddhist organization, for example, I would never have thought about telling them you should actually do meal. First of all, it was not my place, because I'm really just like, at best I'm a friend, I'm a colleague and a friend, but really not more than that. So I am in no position to tell them how to do their work. Secondly, they actually have a system that works. They're fine. They in terms of funding, they don't need institutional donors because they receive community funding, and more than enough. They have processes and procedures that ensure that there is an element of accountability, of learning, of evaluating one's experience. And I'm in no position to tell them that our Western formalized meal approaches are any better than what they're practicing. Right? So this is really like this. This is really why I feel it's so important for us to ask this question, like this question of, do we need to apply Western approaches and everywhere, or is there actually space for? And this is such a big word, so I'm a bit hesitant to use it. But decolonized approaches, right? And we can have a chat about what exactly does that mean. But I feel that acknowledging that it's not our place to run around and tell people you should do this, you should do that. That's a big part of it for me, right? And we can have conversations and we can learn from each other. And we have been doing that. We did this during the research process. The Compendium was launched in January, so it's been almost 6 months that it has been out. And we have been engaging with the organization. They have been attending presentations of the work. They have presented the work themselves in panel discussions. I actually think that a member of the organization is in the audience. Hi. Yeah, so that's the first bit. The other part is again, like, also about positionality, right? And so my conversations with the Islamic faith-based organizations I spoke with were very different, right? So these are my people. I used to work for Islamic FBO, and I very much told them what they should do. But it was different because that's my community and that's my people, and I used to work with them and I know them and they know me, and there's a relationship and I'm part of it. So with them, I actually told them, look, you are a Western Islamic FBO. We all know, and this is the point about securitization, we all know how much you're under pressure. One of the organizations I used to work with was Islamic Relief. I mean, they have been here in the West, they have been under so much pressure in the last few years. Like, every couple of years, there is someone who claims that they have terrorist ties and that they're really collecting funds for Hamas rather than doing development and humanitarian work, right? Every couple of years, you have these accusations. Every couple of years, there's an inquiry. Every couple of years, they get cleared. But the stigma stays, and the accusations, they still linger on. So to them, I said, look, if you do meal, you collect data on what you're doing, and you can show the world that, no, we're not supporting terrorism, but we're doing development work, right?
Okay,
so
Jennifer, I
yeah,
cut you short there again. Sorry. I know you're passionate and I know you want to respond to all the questions. So thank you for the question, Alma. But if we have time at the end, we can come back to you, Jennifer and Alma, into that comment, because I don't want to steal any more time from Ezekiel.